I wanted to thank you all for joining. This is, of course, the April version of my virtual town hall. Been doing these for a few months now with, I think, pretty good success as far as getting information out there. I appreciate everybody for joining in. I just want to start off with a quick apologies. I know so many people have emailed me today about various things and tagged me in Facebook posts and several other things out there that are that are going out there, and I haven't had time to respond to everything, and just wanted to apologize to that right off the bat. So again appreciate you guys and what you do and for being available and being on here. And with that, really just wanted to jump in here, and of course thank you. Just wanted to remind everybody that this is no tax dollars at all used on this. This is something that we put on just as a mechanism for trying to communicate with the community, gather feedback, and find out what's on people's minds. If you're watching on the live stream on Facebook, if you leave a comment, we will do our best to address it during this stream. If we miss something, try to go back and also respond to that. Sometimes I don't always have the information directly available when I in the middle of the stream. So we do our best to respond as we can. Don't always know the answers, but when we find out, we always want to respond. And again, just want to thank everybody. But I just want to take this moment and introduce my co-host for tonight. I've asked Mr. Chris Allen if he would to come on here tonight. And at this point, I just want to ask him to just introduce himself, give a little bit about his background, and why Mount Juliet's important to him.
Well, thanks, James. My name is Chris Allen. I'm a Mount Juliet resident since 2008, born and raised in Tennessee. But family, 2 daughters that are both now Mount Juliet High School graduates, and a son that we adopted from Hong Kong. My wife's a nurse here in Wilson County. Work-wise, I've been in federal law enforcement for about 18 years. I'm a supervisory special agent, and I've been in the fire service for 33 years, basically since I was about 15 years old. Up until about this time, actually till July last year, I was the deputy fire chief here at Mount Juliet on a part-time basis. And I'm still active in the fire service currently now with the Nolensville Volunteer Fire Department. Very passionate about Mount Juliet. We've got a great city. Our city's been through a lot recently, and appreciate your leadership in this, James, for keeping us all informed.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight and be on here. One of the things that I wanted to just address right off the bat was we have seen a lot as a city. We've gone through a lot in these last few weeks. Everything from COVID-19 to the tornado that hit. I think we're at a point now as a city which you're starting to see some things open back up, and I know that's for some people that's maybe there's maybe a little fear involved there on it. But I think we as a city, we as elected officials have to learn from our essential businesses as they've been deemed or tagged during this, and take the lessons we've learned for those and incorporate them in going forward for us, the distancing and this thing. I think the community's done such a great job in terms of avoiding that worst case scenario with the flattening the curve, being responsible. We've got to take that forward and keep going, and of course get the economy restarted here locally. The other thing, and I want to thank Public Works this morning, took me on a tour to kind of highlight some of the things that have been done here in the city for as the cleanup efforts from the tornado. And it's to this point 75,000 cubic yards of waste and debris have been picked up out of the city right away. It took a little time to get started. At first I was really concerned about the time it was taking to get started. But we have got it underway, and it's not all bad, the delays. It's let some people have time to work out details with their insurance companies and be able to respond. I mean, you obviously can't go moving the damage until you've got your insurance company has signed off on the damage. So it's given people time to do that. And we've worked with FEMA. FEMA has recommended a monitoring company that we've used here. and that company helps us get the reimbursement on it. This is a $2 million operation, this cleanup on this. They'll make 3 passes through the city. We're getting very close to the first pass. Far as picking up things, I've got some questions as, why, sometimes why is my neighbor's stuff been picked up and my stuff's not been picked up? On different trips, they're picking up different things. Sometimes it's vegetation, sometimes it's building debris and appliances, you name it. They're not necessarily always mixing those loads, and so sometimes you'll see them kind of hit and miss as they go through there. But that's one of the things that the city is working hard to get that picked up on. I gotta thank everybody who's been involved, city staff, through all of this. They've done such a wonderful job. But Chris, one of the things that gotten some feedback on today is coming off, and what we talked about earlier was coming off these a lot of the restrictions and trying to reopen the economy, and of course do it in a sensible, measurable manner, in a way that try to incorporate wisdom in this thing as we go about. But one of the things that we have done when the tornado did hit was we had food trucks that responded to the area, and they served that area, and the city issued some temporary permitting to allow them to do that. When COVID-19 hit, we saw problems with our supply chain. We saw issues with restaurants being closed because of the social distancing on that, and we saw a delay there as businesses had to learn, a new way to do business. And the city issued permits for the food trucks to go out and fill that void. It didn't make sense to me to see store shelves with food, where food used to be on those shelves, empty shelves, and have
Right.
food trucks out there. At the same time, a lot of people with food trucks had events scheduled in Davidson County and other places that had been canceled as a result of that. And, they had cancellations, so they had an opportunity. We had people that needed food, and it seemed like a really good match on that thing. With the emergency measures in place, it really gave us a lot of flexibility in the permitting, and the permits were issued, as part of the safer at home orders from the governor. We're seeing that start to expire, and one of the things is we're still bound by our ordinances here, and as we start coming out of the state of emergency on this, we have to follow what the law is on it.
Right.
I want people to know that the city of Mount Juliet is not has not changed anything for our policies, procedures, ordinances. We're still operating under the same exact ordinances, policies, and procedures that we were operating under before the tornado hit. One of the things that we see as a city is we've struggled over the years to find ways to support local businesses at the same time, and try to provide for the food truck industry as well in here. Come up with some compromises on the thing. One of the things is when you're city, and we'll talk more about this later on tonight. I know Chris, you'll have a whole lot to add on this, is having some firsthand experience going through it. But one of the things we'll work on is the budget and address. So when you're in a city, you find ways to fund things, and for us, local option sales tax makes up about 45% of the city's funding. That funding comes through businesses that are based here. When you have food trucks, and a lot of times those businesses are not based out of Mount Juliet, so the taxes that are collected there wind up going back to wherever the business is based out of. So in a sense, we wind up funding school systems in another place. We wind up funding the police department for someplace else. We wind up paying for roads in other places when we got local option taxes that are not being collected in the city where it's so. Now, one of the things that's been offered out there, is there a way to try to close that gap? And honestly, there probably is a way to get to that, but the thing that we're dealing with here right now is we have to find a way to operate within the law. I think the message that went out that Mount Juliet's banning food trucks is misleading in itself. Mount Juliet's just simply coming off the safer at home orders that it was operating under and going back to the laws it's always been written and exercising under that. That's really the change that you're seeing. I think what a lot of the people are asking for out there is really a change to the way the law is written, and that takes time to work through. It's a complex issue. As we work to restart the economy, we have local businesses out here that are really hurting, and now is probably not the best time to reintroduce economic changes to the environment out there as far as the demand from customers. It's also a point where we as a city, we're seeing what we call the street or the state shared revenue that comes into the city of Mount Juliet. We were collecting around $145 a person, and that's been reduced to $126, I believe, is the number that we're given now. Now, budget-wise, that's a difference of about $650,000 annually to the city of Mount Juliet. So there's a lot of things out there, a lot of restraints that are in place. I just want to reassure everybody, it's not an effort to ban or make any changes on the way that the food truck operations have historically operated in Mount Juliet.
Yeah, and I'd just like to, I guess, add as a resident, as a family who's a fan of food trucks. My wife had been a little fired up about this earlier today as well, but I think it is important to understand. We had a tornado, overwhelmed our small city, and then the COVID-19 right on top of that. And the food trucks absolutely filled an important void for people, as you said. But I think this is just an unintended consequence. Who thought that we would be having food truck controversy as we hopefully begin to come out of this thing? But I agree there ought to be a compromise that allows the tax money to stay in our city and allow the food trucks to serve venues, neighborhoods, parks, whatever. I know there's some liability issues in there too, but yeah, I think it is important to reiterate that the city is not anti-food truck. It's just, again, this is probably an unintended consequence. It's been neat to see some of our local businesses that could reopen, such as a coffee shop for sure, are choosing not to allow customers in yet and continue drive-through only until they can be sure that they're ready to kind of walk under what the next phase of the new normal is, I guess. So I applaud local businesses for that, and we have a lot of great small businesses here in town, and I hope they can all come out of this.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point there. I mean, we're really in, for lack of a better word, uncharted territory here, as coming out of this, going through a pandemic like this. This is something we've never seen. I saw some reports today about the proposal for tax increases in Nashville. No one in Mount Juliet's talking about tax increases. We're in good shape financially with reserves, but that doesn't mean that we don't at the same time have a lot of capital projects in the pipeline, and capital projects that are very important to the city as far as road and transportation improvements. One of the things in the budget last night that was talked about was putting some of those capital projects on hold. And, I'm adamantly opposed to putting any transportation projects on hold. I just want to say that right off the bat. But the thing with the food trucks is I believe there is an equitable solution for everybody in this. It's quite honestly not been at the top of the priorities on this. Mount Juliet, I think, in fact, it's safe to say probably we have a lot of interest in Mount Juliet right now because of a lot of the events maybe at other places have been canceled as a result of actions of other cities or just events being canceled. And in fact, Mount Juliet, when we had some permitting problems when this first started out, I worked under the state of emergency, worked hard with the people, that could make the decisions under the state of emergency. That's not the vice mayor, but worked hard with them, and the city manager actually come in on a Sunday to open City Hall to make sure those permits were able to be in place and to continue going on that. One of the neighborhoods I worked closely with was Willoughby Station, and I know the same action impacted so many of the residents of Mount Juliet as this. We saw problems in the supermarkets. We saw restaurants not open at the time, and I think it was definitely the right thing to do, but a lot of the justification for stepping over what the ordinance spells out, or stepping over what we traditionally done for that, is lost as we come off the safer at home orders.
Yes.
I just want to, Chris, I'm going to just take a second and go through the comments here and just see. I suspect a lot of people may have some things here on it. I see Andy said live on the device. Andy, I have not moved on the monitor since I started talking when I see the feed, so it's a little confusing. I pulled the feed up on my phone, so I do know it's working. This is just the luck of the draw sometime with social media. Sean says good evening. Good Alan. We do have a good Alan. Gail says good evening. Tricia says good evening.
You've got a comment from the Food Truck Association themselves. So.
Yeah, I see. Pam says, can we have our food trucks in Mount Juliet? Yes, you may. Get another good evening. And hello, Pat. Jackson says, in the city statement, it says the city can grant a temporary event permit 6 times per year, which is not in the code that is linked to it. Is the number arbitrarily chosen? No, it is actually confirmed in code today, and it may not have been in that link, but it's in the code. We can't find another way. Jackson, we possibly can, and it's just, I think it's going to take some time to work through that. It's a complex issue once you start interjecting and changing the variables out there that these restaurants that have struggled so long to keep operating as they try to reopen. They've had lease payments, employees, and other things out there that they've struggled for a long time. And to add additional competition at this point, it needs to be considered carefully. And what we do needs to be thought through. Get something out there that supports these local businesses. The restaurants are primarily a chain in an overall and larger goal for the city. As people move into the city, the more population we have, the more restaurants we attract. The restaurants then in turn help attract other businesses. With these restaurants, the goal is to one day to be able to offer more white-collar jobs in the community, is attract corporations and headquarters to here to bring those things. Everything is just, this leads to the next. And here soon I'll be talking about some stuff coming up on the May Planning Commission, which I think is going to lead to a lot of those things, along with the interchange there at Central Pike. It's really exciting to see what we got coming down the pike as a city, but we've got to get there and get our existing economy reopened. Let's see. Andy asks, what percentage of our revenue is sales tax? Andy, when I looked at the revenue last, it was about 45% of the city's revenue was sales tax. We've also, as mentioned earlier, took a hit on the local or the state shared revenue, the number being reduced from 145 to 126. Jackson, can we give special treatment? When government starts giving special treatment, that usually is not looked at as a good thing, and sometimes people choose to take legal action, and rightfully so. That's part of the issue is we need to be following our laws and making sure that we're not giving people special treatment. Stacy says, just because the safer at home is lifted doesn't mean people want to go out and eat. I understand that, Stacy. I haven't gone out to eat yet either. Not that I haven't been hungry. I'd love a haircut too, but even at 50% capacity, and I get that. The point of the safer at home is if we as a city operate under a state of emergency, the state of emergency powers gives more leeway in the interpretation of the laws, and even suspending laws is needed under a state of emergency. As we see the safer at home being lifted, we expect the state of emergency, the local one at least, to be lifted on that as well. With that in place, yes, there are more options for extending it on it, but at the same time, it's beginning to get to be a struggle to justify keeping that in place. David says sales tax from a handful of food trucks doesn't seem like a much in the grand scale of things. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the numbers we're missing are on those. I don't know. And you're right. It's probably not the end all be all, but it's not just the city that gets impacted on that too. It's our local school system as well. Lauren asked, are the city manager and the mayor on the same page about the food truck permit issue? I do not know. I would assume they are, but I don't know the answer to that. Nashville Food Truck Association says we would love to work with city leaders to find an equitable solution for everyone, and that would be wonderful. Ashley asked, what are the liability issues? I'm not sure what that means. And David is asking about school damage. I'll come back to school damage, David.
Yeah, you've got a question about roads and school damage, which I think you'll get to later. So
I'm going to make a note of that. What ordinance governs food trucks? Jackson, I would be very impressed if I could quote that to you off the top of my head. A lot of that's covered in subdivision regs. Sean says food trucks were a great thing in Willoughby Station. We received a lot of positive feedback from the operators. Do understand that. Yes, the HOE has been hosting twice a month now. Some are actually residents from, and they offer safe operations. That is true. Some are actually residents of the city, and I know some of them for a fact are actually residents of the city, and it's not the majority, but it is some, and it's unfortunate. There's actually been a lot of unfortunate things in the last few months. Taylor's asking about road projects. Taylor, I'll come back to that one. It's not your place to regulate company. You're right about that. What is a food truck? I know of one especially. I think there's one that actually lives in the neighborhood beside me, but out of fear of getting the name wrong, I'm not going to try. And yes, the city support for restaurants, bring in some better options. Well, and that's another thing that the city itself doesn't actually bring in the restaurants. We just create the zoning in the area there to allow them to come in and try to set up a equitable system for doing business here. Isn't special treatment for brick and mortar? Yeah. What do you think restricting feed trucks means if it isn't special treatment for brick and mortar? It's not so much about special treatment for brick and mortar. It's a lot of it has to do, and it's simply coming up with a way to fund things like our roads, our police, our school systems, and like I said, there's got to be some answers to working this out. I don't think somebody asked here, I don't think food trucks necessarily hinder the positive growth you mentioned in St. Juliet, but right now we are in a tough economic state as far as trying to get businesses reopened out there. And actually what food trucks, or what most people are asking for, I think unintentionally is for new privileges under the law, and it's being presented as if Mount Juliet's putting additional restrictions on food trucks, and the actual fact is Mount Juliet has lessened the restrictions on food trucks through this thing, and we're just simply going back to the same ordinance that we were operating under. we can definitely look at efforts and look at items to try to change that. But that involves changing the law, which is going to be at least May 13th before the next commission meeting and 2 readings to do so.
James, can I jump in here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, as I know you've got a long agenda, and I think that if it sounds like on the food trucks, I mean, we're simply going back. The city is simply going back to what the rules were prior. So we're not trying to restrict anything. We're just going back, and looks like if the Food Truck Association wants to work with the city, then that's something that the elected body and council with the city attorney can do. But as most as people may or may not know, it takes several sessions to get anything changed in ordinance, and it's going to take some consultation with the city attorney. But I think there's some great comment out there, and there's definitely interest in changing it. So
Yeah,
I know you've got a long agenda you want to get to here.
we do, and Chris, I knew this was going to be for lack of a better term, kind of a hot button issue tonight to go over. And I mean, I think you summed it up well. There's no additional restrictions being placed on anyone out there. And in fact, the opposite's been true. The city of Mount Juliet has gone out of its way to suspend a lot of the restrictions and permitting process that's been in place in the past. And that's just something that we've tried to work with people on this to get through. All right. All right. I've talked about the tornado cleanup, the FEMA, food trucks. One of the other things, Chris, last night, I think the biggest thing the city takes on every year, and the most important thing, obviously, with my job, is setting the city budget every year, discussing the budget. About this time every year, the city manager works with the department heads, puts out his version of the budget after working. We get the lovely budget books to go through. Chris, I know you've got firsthand experience with working on budget books.
Yes.
So, with that said, I mean it sets the guidelines for our spending on our capital projects, personnel, the things that get added, the expenses, the improvements with the city. It sets the priorities. It is by far one of the most important things that we do, and we're seeing a budget that is, I guess, right off the bat, definitely challenged by the problems that we're going through economically with the pandemic, with the tornado before that as a city. We're seeing, as I pointed out earlier, cuts in state shared revenue. We're seeing that. We're seeing stores closed, and we're seeing a drop in what's estimated being collected for as our sales tax as a city, which is said before too, about 45% of our funding on here. So we're seeing these things, and you're starting to see it reflected in the budget. I'd say good news for the city is we have healthy cash reserves. I'd still not be surprised at the end of the year if we don't see close to breaking even and possibly coming out a little better off than we are as far as in the cash reserves once the year's completed. So it's a good place to be in. There's not many cities out there that can say they're in that situation. We're not considering any layoffs this year. I think pay cuts are not in the budget per se. We can definitely talk about that, Chris. I've got some thoughts and some reasons behind it as to why it might make sense to the city to explore that. But from your standpoint, you weren't a department head, but you were, I think it's safe to say, a former number 2 in a department. And you've had your experience going through the budget. I think when you were employed with the city, one of the things that you sat down and worked on was a long-term solution for the funding of the fire department. You spent a lot of time into that, and we've saw several attempts over the years to try to address that. And that's just one component of the budget, but there's many out there, and the process of going through it, calculating the cost for the year, your estimations on what it's going to cost you for a salary and operation cost, and putting that together. Can you just speak a little bit to kind of what that process works as through a department?
Well, of course, a couple things, and a lot of people I think may not understand this. The fire department, for instance, is the only department that the property tax in the city of Mount Juliet funds. Everything else is funded out of the sales tax. Now, there are some sewer fees and other things like that, and the fire department does get money through fees. But each department head and typically their deputies, which was my role, usually begin before the first of the year looking at their new budget needs for the upcoming fiscal year. Recommendations are made amongst the departments, and then they're ultimately submitted in the department head's recommendation part of the budget. It should work that then the city manager has his review of the budget and makes his recommendations, and then finally, the Board of Commissioners has the final review and ultimately the say-so. One thing I wanted to comment on or ask you about, James, and maybe this isn't the time, but you and two other commissioners were very heavily involved in trying to come up with a funding solution last year for the fire department, particularly, that ultimately was not successful. I know last night the mayor made the comment to you that you were talking about the sky was, quote, falling last year, and now we have a surplus in at least the emergency services fund. However, that surplus is from fees versus sustained revenue, and I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, that was brought up last night, and we do have a better balance in the emergency services fund this year, and we do have some surplus money in there. Primarily funding source for that was one-time fees from Amazon. Now, I think it's safe to say, if not assume, that there will not be a new Amazon constructed every year in the city. There's going to always be construction on those things, but making funding decisions off building things, is whether you allow building or not allow building, is to me, it's good for people to help pay for growth. But growth money, being one-time money, has always been my opinion that it should go to capital items or one-time expenses, not reoccurring expenses. And that's what I don't like about it. I'm happy to see a stream of revenue that helps fund the fire department. We are, comparing us to Lebanon, our spending on fire services is about 43 cents on a dollar compared to what they're doing. So we're definitely not overspending in any way by any comparable mind. But taking that one-time money on that thing, and two, as being a decision maker on projects being approved, it's kind of always in your back of your mind on this thing here is like, well, when your funding is tied to the approval of this thing, does it always get a fair debate on whether this is a good project for Mount Juliet, or is this a project for Mount Juliet because it's tied to our funding stream on this? That to me is not something I want to be a variable in choosing when we're doing a rezone or project approvals in the city as to what we do or don't do. Is if we don't fund it, then we don't have fire service potentially on that thing. It's to me, I'm glad we have a funding source in for it. With all the discussion last year about taxes or taking funds out of other places, the ultimate solution was just simply a different tax.
Right, and yes, the money such as the Amazon project is great for buying things, as you mentioned, capital projects, equipment, vehicles, facilities, but it can't sustain payroll because it is one-time money, and that was something I think gets lost in the debate. Our property tax is incredibly low, and we're lucky for that, but also our service compared to our neighbors, we actually have a maximum of 7, typically 6 firefighters on duty, period, in the city of Mount Juliet, whereas Lebanon has 20 firefighters on duty every day, and we actually have a few more people population-wise than they do. So we've got a lot of room and a lot of needs and a lot of growth to catch up on to adequately serve this city.
Yeah, my statements last night were not so much intended to be political. I think if anything last year was political, but this,
Yes.
you know, my statements, I think probably what set it off was when we were talking uh, about adding the chief back in this thing, because, you know, just to set the story up, last year, you know, you and another gentleman were cut from the budget, and what that did was it basically cut about 10% or 8%. Actually, eight's the actual number of paid responders out of the force for our fire department. So that cuts out there that put what would be handled by, I don't know, 3 or 4 people at another city by our size back on the fire chief. And of course, we saw what happened on March 3rd. We had a tornado. We had command issues. Not so much the issues with it, but we had people that were out working because we had limited numbers. But we can't have them in command. You can't have the same people at 2 places, and when you have limited numbers, that's exactly what we ran into to some degree. Not to say that overall the city did a wonderful job, especially considering the resources it has. And I don't think anybody would take away from the effort that staff put in and the work that they did, and especially not what we saw from the citizens with the volunteers and their turnout on it.
Absolutely.
But you know, we cut the force. We have less people there when we need them the most in the city. As a result of the cuts, we saw the volunteer coordinator cut. We've saw losses in the numbers of volunteers, and I equate some of those losses to losing the coordinator on that thing. And I think some of it may be just treatment of how we treated people during this process. But regardless of whatever the reason is we saw less numbers at this time. And when we needed people the most, we kind of had the least over the last few years as far as number of bodies.
Right. Yeah, there's a direct correlation between the loss of John Donovan, who was the assistant chief in charge of volunteers and one of the founding members of the fire department, and really the initial fire protection efforts dating back to 2008. There's a direct correlation between the loss of Sean and the loss of the volunteers that just left out of frustration, lack of, feeling valued, or lack of leadership. So it definitely had a detrimental impact. And I know now there's an effort, after we got rid of 2 people last year, that there's an effort to replace that. And for Chief Leffman's sake, I hope he gets some help.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of didn't set well last night when I made the comparison about this putting a single person in here in the place of 2 part-timers cost the city 18% more in terms of money, and it cut the number of responders at the scene in half, and then it cut the actual number of hours worked weekly by almost 30%. And I was like, hey, the taxpayers are getting half the bodies at the fire scene. They're getting a third less number of hours worked, and on top of it, they're getting charged 18%. And maybe I shouldn't have thrown it out there, but
mathematically, it does not make any sense. Certainly, from a fiscal conservative perspective, it doesn't. Now they're going to have to pay a benefit package that they were not having to pay before. So.
Yeah, and that contributes to the cost on that thing. And you ask about some of the other things, and it's been something we've been talking about since 2017. Is trying to, because at the same time we're talking about funding the fire service. Last year, the city was well over a $3 million surplus in funds from the general fund, but at the same time we're cutting costs because the fire department, since it was basically solely funded from property tax, the property tax is not enough to run our very small fire department. And that's kind of where the frustration sets in, is while the city has the money as a whole, the money's not allowed to be sent in the fire department.
I know, speaking of spending in the budget, I know you had some questions about road projects, and that was brought up last night, so maybe that's a good time to, I know you're passionate about that last night, and maybe a good time to get your listeners up to speed on that.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things when we started seeing the projected cuts and decline in revenue as the city coming in on the thing was one of the requests that was made as part of the budget process were to slow down the capital projects. And I think staff and city manager had it right in terms of pressing ahead with projects that have grant money associated with it. And what I mean by that is some of the projects we have in the city are either funded at 95, 80%. Maybe there's even some that are less, but funded either by federal or state money. We have to produce our local match, which is going to be 5% or 20% on that. We don't want to do anything that's going to hinder us getting that project done and that funding in place. So the decision was made early on that we'll keep pursuing those projects. But the question really came up about four other projects that are 100% city financed. And to me, we have, as a city, we've known we've got infrastructure improvement issues. We've known we got transportation issues in this thing, and I just couldn't stand the thought of pushing that off another year because we're basically having some slowdown economically. And the biggest thing that got me with this was when I sat there and really asked and dug into about how much money we're talking about saving on these projects, because none of them are in the construction phase yet. They're all in engineering, studying, all those activities, and it's probably savings anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 depending on the project for the city on this thing. And as far as what it's going to cost to do these projects, that's very, very small. I mean, we're talking about maybe 1 or 2% of the total project on this thing. And to give up spending such a small amount that's going to delay projects like the Golden Bear widening, Old Lebanon Dirt Road widening. There's other things that are tied to Old Lebanon Dirt Road widening. I've been talking with city staff about how possibly using that widening to extend sewer services to people that have been without sewer services for years since they've been inside the city limits, have been asking for it. And while we've got crews out there already digging, I mean, it just to me makes sense to go ahead and put those pipes in the ground while we've already got the ground disturbed. That's a win-win. That's not going to cost the taxpayers of Mount Juliet really anything more. Nor is, if it was a straight up sewer project, it'd be funded out of the sewer fund, which is a separate fund, which is to fund that is done by your sewer rates. So it's an opportunity to get that done without impacting the sewer fund, get transportation projects moving. But putting those on pause for me is just not an option on any of these local projects. I think there was a question about South Mount Juliet Road, the widening, the bridge widening. We're in a situation where we're probably going to have to do what they call a friendly condemnation. I don't know about you, Chris, but I've never personally been in a condemnation situation. I don't think there's probably anything friendly about it. But
yeah, that's probably an oxymoron.
I agree, but it's one of those things. We have one property owner that's not wanting to work things out, that's holding the road up. So and that'll get into another philosophical debate on probably eminent domain. It's not really called eminent domain if you're taking it for public purposes, but as far as widening the road there, there's one property owner that we've run into some problems with on that. We actually got a surprise on the road widening, or the widening over I-40 there is we wound up getting some additional federal funding on that. So we believe while with the property, acquiring the property has slowed a little bit, we actually think we're going to come out with this one in a very positive manner financially. And that's slated to start very soon. The exact projections are in my newsletter, which I don't have in front of me right now, but it's out there to get that one started really quick. The other one is widening Mount Juliet Road south of Providence. That one's still in the surveying phases. And I mean, until you start really digging into the steps it takes to widen these things, as far as surveys, approvals, all the things that are involved with that, sometimes these go back to different groups in the state. I know we've got some that tie back to Native Americans signing off on these things. Some sign off from utilities. They've all got timelines to review those. You've got, when you accept federal funding or state funding on that, that also means while it lowers your local cost, it raises the number of requirements that you've got to meet as a city in order to do the project. So it costs the city less, takes longer to improve, but ultimately, when it comes to widening a state road, we do not have a lot of choice in that matter.
And might be a good time just to plug your newsletter, because the one you just sent out did a phenomenal job outlining specifically project by project where they were in the timeline. Because yes, you're right, these things take way longer than anybody in government or the private sector would like. But I know it's probably impossible to go through them all here tonight, but you might want to just mention that to people because you did do a great job giving everyone the status of all those things.
Yeah, and I take a lot of that information. It's information that's sent to us as public officials. I do my best to try to word it in English. Some of the acronyms I succeed at better than others. I'm thankful for my wife who can go through that and read it and say, I do not know what that means, nor will anybody else know if you send that out that way. But what Chris is talking about is we send that newsletter out, usually monthly. You can go to jamesmanus.com and sign up there. There's jamesmanus.com/alerts and sign up there and get that information. We send it out, like I said, monthly. Try not to send any more than 3 emails max a month to you. So we sent the newsletter out and the notice of this town hall, and that's probably going to wrap up the month of April for us. But we do our best to keep the number of limitations, contacts with you low, but at the same time provide the maximum amount of information. And sometimes too, we've used that same information when there's projects coming up and around people, when properties being rezoned or planning commission is discussing information. I've taken it and just plotted off names, within a mile or 2 distance from them, just send them a little heads up, hey guys, this is under consideration. Don't even know if it's on your radar. And I think people want to know. With any project that the city does or any government body, or even if it's down to your HOA, there's always pros and cons with any of those things. But I tell you one thing, in my experience in office, the one thing people don't want is to not know what's going on, especially if they know you've known something for a while and you didn't share it.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the other things discussed last night during the budget was the police made a presentation. And, they talked about some of the needs, and, coming off the tornado. One was a hardened dispatch area for our dispatchers. The building we're in is, it's been a couple of churches over the years, and it's a blessing to the city to have that building, but at the same time, it's not a hardened building. That it's not a structure that we want to put something so critical in. So that, they need more room for evidence. Some of the state requirements for holding evidence have been increased, so we're keeping stuff longer, so we need more storage for that. So that was one of the projects that they presented in the budget last night. It's most likely not going to fall in this year's budget. We'll probably wait till we get a little bit more stability on our revenues coming in. Other thing that they talked about, which was really intriguing, and I noticed over to the left, somebody's comment said, I see more police than fire out on the roads, and you should, I think, in the way things work, at least. We have our police officers, they're in individual units, so there's more units out there. They're moving around and on the move, and a lot of time the fire department, you can have as many as 2, 3, 4 bodies in one vehicle, and hopefully it's not moving all the time, because usually if it's moving, it means something probably went wrong for somebody. Somebody's having a bad day a lot of times. But yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Well, maybe just for a second, I know you want to talk about the policy change that's being proposed. On the police department, I think it's just important for people to understand the history. The police department was originally in City Hall. That's where dispatch was. And then they were blessed to get the current building on Charlie Daniels that I believe was facilitated through Joy Church before they moved to their new facility. And that's a great facility, but yes, it was not built originally to be a law enforcement building. And as our police department grows, you mentioned the increase in evidence. Just our officers do a great job with pretty small staffing, with the Guardian Shield system that's come on, there's amazing successes happening almost daily, but a lot of those stops generate evidence, which has to go somewhere and has to be secured and maintain chain of custody. So, coupled with dispatch, which not only does dispatch for the police department, but does for fire department as well as animal control, and they're the 24-hour presence at the police department. They handle all the walk-in stuff over the phone anyway, so it's not as though we built a police department from scratch and are already outgrown it. We've just kind of made a building work over time, and I think that's, it's just a little bit. It's important to understand the history and why this money is being asked for. We have had multiple severe weather, incidents in this city, and we need our dispatchers to be able to function no matter what happens. So between that and evidence, that's impetus behind that request.
Yes, and that's an important point you made there on that, far as the evidence and storing that, the history behind that. At one time, City Hall, was not only just City Hall, it was City Hall and the police department. So all the operations you see running out of the City Hall building had the full police department running out of it as well. That's a repurposed building. That used to be a bank that the city acquired.
Good point. Yeah,
So,
even when I moved down here in 2008, dispatch was still in the police department, and in the area that I believe now is a mail and copy room. So the city's grown, our needs at City Hall have grown, our needs for the police department. And even now, our police department's not housed under, we've got some people that are housed in a separate facility just because of space constraints. So, growth doesn't necessarily pay for itself, but growth does require increased public safety. That's a big reason for, I think, was a very well thought out request. It's a shame it can't happen this year, but hopefully it'll be able to be funded next year.
I after going through some of the things that we saw unfold last night, I don't necessarily know that it's a bad thing if it gets pushed off and gets thought through on this. Just reflecting on some of the things that were said last night, and maybe it's not all bad.
I think there needs to be some more education about to the elected officials about space constraints and the true needs for this project. I know one thing that was thrown out was putting that facility at the new fire station that's going to be built up off Lebanon Road. Well, that's already a $3 million project to build the fire station that we need. So if we move dispatch in there, there's going to be increased funding to make that. And really, to having a 24-hour dispatch center inside a fire station, those two really aren't conducive to each other. There's different needs. So you're right. Maybe a little more time to get it presented and properly funded next year is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think the original intention with the fire station was maybe have a backup facility there.
When I was still at the fire department, that was the intent, was a very limited facility for a backup if there was a power outage or an IT a server issue or something. But never was the plan to build a hardened facility that I believe could be the primary dispatch center. And with, I know the police department estimates they'll need 6 workstations in the near future in dispatch, and the current facility just doesn't have the capability for that. And I don't believe there's a square footage at the planned fire station for that.
Yeah, and going back to the fire department on that, to make that change, we don't know what it's going to do. The timeline, it's still in the design aspect. We don't know what it's going to do with cost. That was, the fire department got bonded last year to make that project. Actually, what we wound up doing was just refinancing our bonds at a lower interest rate, and instead of taking the money out, we just borrowed more at the same interest rate, keep the payment the same, and essentially got the fire department funded out of that. That's probably not a bad way of going at it. I mean, there's lots of options, and we could debate funding it one way or the other, but that's how it got funded. There's a finite amount of money on that thing. I think the department, that building is probably about 2 years past due anyway. But
Yeah.
thinking the design changes on that, I don't know what's going to do. The timing, it's just a lot of unknowns to me as far as that. These things to me do not need to be worked out at the table by 5 politicians. That's just
Right.
that's not my area of expertise. That's just I gather
Yeah,
the
I think
information. I listen for feedback. I talk to the people who do it for a living, and I turn to our staff and those that have done this and have seen it done in other cities. They know what works, what didn't work, and me just sitting up there at the table to try to come out whatever's politically most easy for me. Not saying that's necessarily what happens, but that is definitely not a way to make decisions on a fly on that thing. So I don't necessarily think anybody was per se trying to make a decision on that, but it's got to be weighed carefully on it. It shouldn't just be looking for the easiest solution to get it done right now. I mean, we should be looking at what's the solution that's going to work best for the city function wise,
and I
and it's
do
going to
think the
make their
police
long
department
term.
had presented that. Unfortunately, I think it became political. But to your point, I think it's important as the elected officials, yes, ask good hard questions, but you have professional leadership in these departments whose job is to bring you all plans, and I think that was done. But yeah, to make changes on the fly from the podium does not make sense for sure.
Agreed. But on that, I mean, some other things last night, the police
Yeah.
department was talking about take-home vehicles. These are just some very small changes that we can do. One of the things that I've made a point of over the last year is to try to spend more time with departments there at the city, find out what they're doing, what's working well for them, what challenges they've had. I've made an effort to do several ride-alongs over the past year to spend time with the officers out there in the field, talk to them, see what type of challenges that they're facing. And some of the stuff I get is I don't want to present it in a way that I've got people complaining to me. That's not the case at all as far as people complaining, but I'm going to address it as this is just overall it's a nationwide problem that police departments are facing, and that's retention of officers, the turnovers on those things. And to be honest, when you see things out there, there's not a lot of stuff on the news, on TV that really is promoting police officers in a positive way. A lot of times, you're seeing just a lack of respect, sometimes eroded. And I'm not just saying that every officer out there is a perfect person either, but at the same time, a lot of the reasons that people attracted them to the police service and being able to serve, those things aren't necessarily there. And so we're seeing across the nation retention issues. I mean, it's a stressful job. The hours are difficult sometimes. It puts stress on marriages, stress on families. And it's one of the professions where you can go to work and you can really literally say every day that when you show up for work, you're putting your life on the line. So for me, they asked for some concessions with take-home cars. These are the cars that the officers take, just extending that a little bit. These are things that they requested that are in line with other departments around us. The cost is, it's measured in the hundreds of dollars in what they put out in the estimates on those things. It really only impacts a few employees. The other was on call for people that are responding on call. The way we have some of that set up right now, you have people on call, and they can't take their city issued call, or they can't take their city issued vehicle with them. So what they have to do is load the family up and either drive in separate vehicles, or if they get called out, them and the whole family has to leave so the officer can go home and then respond. And it's just some things like that we can make it easier for the officers. But as us as taxpayers, the benefit is we get quicker response times. One of the questions I asked last night to the deputy chief was, is there examples when the tornado hit of people being delayed, or would people have been on the scene quicker if the changes that you're requesting were in place? And the answer was yes. I I know of some incidents that would have delivered people quicker on the scene, made it easier for their family, and served the citizens of Mount Juliet, I think, better. The third option they were asking was just the force multiplier option, which essentially lets the officers use the cars more inside the city limits off duty, with the caveat that if they're in the car, that they have to respond as needed in an incident that happens in front of them. They have to respond like an officer on duty, which is literally a force multiplier out there. If you think of an officer attending church with you, and if they've taken their car there, they're obligated to respond. You have the presence of a police car out. It's the cost, again, is virtually nothing, but the presence inside of our community. And someone, I mean, earlier I just looked over it and I saw them comment, say, I see the police out there a lot more than I see the fire department. And I say, again, that's a good thing. We want that presence out there. The city routinely ranks as one of the safest cities inside the state of Tennessee, which is something we're very proud of and something that we work hard to maintain. I'm supportive of the police department in these things. These are little changes that we can make in part of this budget process. Low cost to taxpayers, but I think a big payoff to us as citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly in a time when we may not be able to compete on straight out salaries, whether it's the economy or the tax structure or whatever, anything else we can do to improve retention, because a cost that you can't measure and it's hard to quantify to elected officials sometimes is the cost of turnover. There's a huge cost just in upfront training at the academy, which you can quantify. But then getting someone up to speed, learning our city, learning the streets, learning the people. When you lose an officer, a lot of experience walks out the door, and we've lost some good officers in the last couple of years. It's hard to say. You can't probably point to any one thing, but certainly I think this policy proposal there's not a downside. If you could get a detective on the scene more quickly when he or she has to respond from home, they can take over and begin their work, and then you can get the uniformed officers back in service more quickly. We talked earlier about the Guardian Shield system, which has been phenomenal for the city. Well, part of the reason for the success is officers on the street, once those alerts go out that there's a stolen vehicle or a wanted person, the more officers we have out there, the more likely we are to locate and apprehend that person, recover the vehicle, whatever it may be. So, yeah, I've read the policy and I think it's well put together, and kudos to Chief Mullins for getting it out there. And I would hope this would be something that would unanimously pass.
Yeah, and I share that hope on it, that it passes unanimously on it. I think it is a good thing. And you mentioned Guardian Shield. That was something that was put in place in last year's budget. And the initial reaction from some was somewhat negative to it. And I had concerns too on Guardian Shield when it come in. I'll just quickly add that the city of Mount Juliet took proactive steps to ensure privacy and safety around that. I think we've got some of the best laws in the state of Tennessee when it comes to the privacy and safety. Full disclosure on the website about anybody that it's shared with. That's not something I think you're going to find anywhere else in the state as to what the data is, how long they're taking it. And then this of course, command staff there from the police department come back and said, well, state allows this, but we're going to cut that number in a third because it's important for us too to make sure that privacy and the data is protected for the citizens out there. Some people complained about the cost and said, why did the city buy so many cameras? I think what gets missed in that when that question is asked is you say, well, the city of Mount Juliet bought 30-something cameras and other cities around us bought 10 cameras or even less in some cases. Why is the city then sending so much? I think the better way to ask that question is why did the city of Mount Juliet get so many cameras for basically less or the same price as other cities around us? And I think that's one thing that gets missed in it is the tremendous work that the IT department, the IT department and the police department put in to get this thing in place, to test it and get it up and going. As of right now, the deployment to the system has been somewhat slowed, and the tornado was some of that. It's taken some utilities away from getting pieces in place that we needed. We're about a third of the way deployed, and that's just a ballparking number on it for the deployment on that thing. But we're about a third, and like you pointed out, it seems like it's almost daily that we're seeing something hit on that inside the city limits of Mount Juliet, and the police department respond to it. I think they're probably about 80 to 90%, maybe, that they're closing in on it when it gets to be a hit, being able to recover it, just having, fortunately, guys in the right spot. But doing a wonderful job with that program and keeping this city really in tip-top shape when it comes to public safety from the police protection standpoint.
Yeah, and it's certainly a thing that, affects a lot of your constituents in your district, particularly. There's, you guys have been hit hard with vehicle break-ins. Unfortunately, a lot of people coming from out of county to do that type of thing. So with this system, we'll be able, the police department will have coverage on really any way in and out of our city. And as you said, it just seems like every other day we're seeing a success with, both stolen vehicles and people with extensive criminal histories with active warrants being taken into custody that otherwise we might not have ever happened. So again, and there's a policy which we're discussing, anything we can do to get more officers out there on the street, marked police cars in front of businesses, and getting our investigators and detectives, SWAT team members on the scene more quickly is I think a win for all of us that live here in the city.
Definitely.
And one other thing, if you don't mind, you mentioned our IT department, which are kind of I keep saying I don't work at the city anymore, but the city's IT department, which are really the unsung heroes a lot of times, because it's, at least I think it's still 3 people, but not only they do things like get Guardian Shield up and running, but they get our command trailer to the scene and so many other things. So just shout out to those folks, because between making dispatch work, making Guardian Shield work, making your public meetings work, such as the workshop last night, they really don't get enough credit.
No, that is very true, and that's, when it comes to IT, that's my line of work, is for what I do as a living, is working in IT, and I see firsthand what they do. I see firsthand too what the city pays for that department, and I got to say, folks, it's amazing the value you get out of that department. You were spot on. We've still got 3 people involved in that department that work it and essentially run every aspect of the city, from dispatch to just supporting sewer billing, finance, you name it, police, fire, all the way down, camera systems. They're involved in every bit of it. And you mentioned too, we did a Zoom meeting, the last meeting we did at the Board of Commissioners, and they were there to test that out, work the kinks out, sat down with the commissioners, test it out individually before the meeting and make sure it was all in place. I can't say, working in the industry, I can't say enough good things about what we get as a city.
Yeah, it's amazing what a small staff is able to do, and it really, I think their job description probably reads other duties as assigned, because that's what they seem to have to do most days. So hats off to them.
Definitely agree. Well, last night we talked about was the budget workshop. What'll happen, the next step that we'll see happen is the budget will be brought back, either for a different workshop, if somebody calls for a workshop to work more on it, or, which I think is unlikely, but I think it'll go to first reading on that, and it'll be a vote. You'll see probably a lot of amendments suggested on that, and you're going to see you see more detail discussed on certain items on those things. A lot of the components to the budget, as far as salaries and operating costs, may not vary much year to year on that, but things when it comes to like capital improvement items, it can be down to vehicle replacements, things like that. Those are the things that you'll see more discussion being talked. The things that were in the summary there, as far as adding additional firefighters this year or not adding additional firefighters. We were talking about the new station. Obviously, taking the firefighters out of the middle station of the city and putting them in the north station of the city is not a plan. Moving the same amount of men around and building a new building and calling that enhancement is not a plan. That just increases your cost by adding a third building. So more bodies have got to be added. We've talked about the funding challenges that we've had. I mentioned a little bit about the efforts to try to just combine those like every other city does with the general funds, and that's been something I've been talking about since 2017. And to this point, not a lot of success, but I'm confident that we'll get there, get our staffing numbers up. It's important that they do. That was one of the things that was brought up by one of the commissioners last night, was adding additional bodies to this. And I believe it is so important to do so. We've seen some volunteer numbers come down for a number of reasons since the last year's budget passed. And I think we need to get some of those full-time numbers in there so that we can get to the NFPA standards for the city, NFPA 1710. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but
1710.
yeah, so we can get closer to those standards that we need to be meeting as a city to meet those minimum standards out there and get those bodies in place, come up with a way to pay for them, get the station staffed, and move forward. That may not happen in this budget cycle, but I hope we can at least move it one step closer. So that's kind of where we're at with the budget. Chris, we've gone a little bit over an hour here on it. I'll be putting out more videos and talking more about the budget as we get closer and things and suggestions get changed, and I'll make sure everybody's aware of any major changes to the budget as we move. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? If not, I'm going to kind of kill the talks on new items. I'm going to scroll back through some of these comments, but before I go to those comments, one of the options we have with our newsletter subscribers is that we offer them the opportunity to join the meeting through Zoom, and not just the opportunity to join through Facebook. Facebook you can watch, but we offer our subscribers the ability to join on Zoom as well if they want to ask a question here live. I think we still got a couple of people out there watching. If you have a question, just please use the Zoom option to raise your hand, and I'll get you on here. If not, we'll kind of end the discussion on the new items, and I'll go back through and try to address some of these comments that have been asked.
Like Mike has a question.
Let's get Mike on here.
Hello.
Mike, let me get you on full screen here. Go ahead with your question there, Mike.
I just wanted to say thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. It's the third Zoom each week now that I'm on. The Election Commission is also doing it this way. But thank you very much for the insight, and it was very educational.
Well,
you guys stay safe.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join, and of course your prayers and support here. I know you are personally involved in. You mentioned the Election Commission. I see you there working the polls, and you know it gets noticed. I don't know if you get a lot of thank yous, but I'll say it here publicly. Thank you for what you do for the citizens of Mount Juliet and Wilson County too. So, Mike, appreciate what you do.
It's going to be real strange this year.
Yes, that's a whole other topic with COVID-19, and I actually had some of our Election Commission folks on my mind today as I was driving around town after the meeting I had with Public Works this morning. I was thinking about where we may be going and how little time we have to make any changes to that on the fly. And I'm alluding to some discussions that are going around nationally about expanding the absentee voting program or voting by mail. And I don't know exactly what the discussions are in the state of Tennessee. I've just listened to it mostly from a national level, but I know those discussions are out there, and we've got to make sure that people can safely participate in our elections. It's not optional.
Yeah, right now they're talking about not doing a mail-in ballot. They're trying to not do that, but spacing is going to be important. Workers are going to be 6 foot apart. tape on the floor to keep the voters back. We're going to have somebody at the door monitoring. It's going to be all new. Face shields and masks for us. It'll be very interesting. But thank you again.
Yeah, thank you again, Mike. I'm going to mute Mike here, bring Chris back, and we're going to go through, just quickly go through some of these questions, if I see any here. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of questions probably still about the food trucks on here. And if you're joining us late, I'll just add, the city's not made any changes to the requirements for food trucks or anything of that nature. There's in fact not even anything proposed for as a change with the food trucks. Essentially, with the Safer at Home option, the city encountered a lot of food trucks that had a lot of opportunity and was able to use that basically state of an emergency to lax some of the requirements for its permitting and just let it go, and it worked well. But as we see that coming to an end, the reopening of the restaurants on that, we're actually coming to an end on the state of emergency. So really what you're seeing right now is just the same law as it's as always has been in the city being enforced. That's not saying that there's not some room for discussions about improving things or changing the way we approach that. But at the same time, that's not something we take lightly with our local businesses that we have out there, changing the economic variables and the impact out there that governs around this. It's a critical time as far as businesses recover here locally, jobs and the infrastructure around that. So there's a lot of moving pieces in that. There's concerns around tax revenue that's generated from the local restaurants, loss of businesses there for funding of police, schools, and roads, and we talked about that. But right now we're just operating under the ordinance as it's written. I just want everybody to understand, not been any changes. So I don't know what more I can add on that tonight. I mean, it's a process that we can go through looking at that and making some recommendations. I saw the food truck industry had offered to try to work with us on that, and I'm very appreciative. So at this point, I'm just going to scroll through these comments and see. It says, excellent job for our police department employing the system, keeping a watch. Does the Mount Juliet Police Department see any compensation for apprehending someone on an active warrant issued as another county? The officers, no. I don't even believe the police department as a whole sees anything different if they apprehend somebody from a different department or jurisdiction. Chris, you may be.
Yeah, no, there's just, whenever when they encounter somebody, there's a records check, and if a warrant comes up, the officer will find out, is it out of Wilson County? Is it out of Metro? Is it out of another state? And sometimes if it's out of another state, then they have to figure out if they're going to authorize extradition or not. But no, the police department will serve the warrant as they're supposed to. Person will be taken into custody, typically taken to Wilson County Jail. Sometimes if it's a warrant out of Metro, they'll be able to meet Metro PD and transfer the prisoner that way. But no, they're doing their job, serving the warrants as they learn of them, but there's no revenue off of that. The Guardian Shield system just allows them to know, have a better idea of what's going on in our city and what wanted subjects, what stolen vehicles are there. And that's very typically, if that stuff's going on in our city, that's an indicator that there's probably going to be additional crime occurring. So it just gives them a jump on, quote, taking the bad guys off the street, for lack of a better word.
And that's not something to take lightly, definitely. David is reminding me that I have written here a note on the school status. I don't know about the official stance from the school board that is outside of the government of the city of Mount Juliet. That's a separate entity. But what I can say is the information I've come to learn from city staff is that Mount Juliet Middle School, I believe it's probably safe to say at this point that the school is not quite a total loss. I think they're going to be able to save what they call the 6th grade wing on that, and to expect something to be rebuilt back at that thing that's going to look a lot like what we see at Gladeville Middle School. Look for a design very similar to that, and I believe Stoner Creek, everything there is a total loss except for the gymnasium, and I'm told to expect something to be proposed back for that location that looks similar to what we have at Springdale. So that's the plan. I can tell you what I heard at the last school board meeting, which was at that time they presented a plan to have those schools constructed and built back. At that point, it was 14 months, and to have them that introduces some problems for the next school year. But it's an aggressive timeline. I can tell you as a city official, my commitment is to work with the school system in any way possible to expedite that and ensure that everything to my power, from the city at least, that we do everything we can to see those schools repaired, rebuilt as quickly as possible, and for the least amount of impact on our children that are going to other schools that are no doubt going to be absorbing a lot of those kids have to go somewhere, waiting to hear an official plan on what exactly that plan is going forward. But my commitment is just to try to expedite that and work with the school system in any way possible to get that done as quickly as possible.
I think it's just incumbent on all of us, just as parents and residents, to be as patient as possible. That they've got, I guess you could say, one benefit of the COVID-19 is they have a little more time now to come up with a plan for this fall. But whatever plan they come up with will be a compromise, because there's no way, when you lose 2 buildings and you had to rebuild them from scratch, it's going to be challenging. And I just hope everyone will be patient and do the best to make this work for all of our children.
Yeah, that's it. There's no easy answers, and there's no spare school buildings sitting around. I mean, even with the Green Hill High School opening, there's challenges, and I've heard various plans as far as putting Group A and B and mixing it up and stuff. But I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But there's really are no easy answers going forward on that. Sean said, talking about take-home vehicles, Sean said it worked well for the fire department. I think he's he's commenting in regards to when we had the 2 assistant chiefs that were part-timers took the vehicles home, and they responded from fires directly from there. And we many times had cases where we saw those chiefs on scene, literally first responders on scene as a result of having those cars at home. So that paid off well, especially having both those guys, really all the command staff on the north side, where you could argue the actual staffing in stations have the least presence. Yeah, Candy is just weighing in on the food trucks. Someone, I do not know. I don't know the answer to that, Claire. Yeah, Bob's commenting on here saying we're down 10 officers compared to 11 in other cities. And, I'm not sure if he's responding. I don't know if he's commenting necessarily in terms of fire or police. We do have I think it's safe to say, a smaller police force than Lebanon as well. But I've looked for numbers on that as to try to make comparisons on it. Right now, I can say we have a good response rate in terms of what we do as crime rate in this city. That says a lot for what we got. I agree. We do have some needs for some officers. We need some positions filled. Some of the challenges is just what alluded to earlier with a higher turnover rate than what we may have seen in the past. But we've got some stuff, and I know you commented about the infrastructure on there, and Andy and his staff are doing. You said Andy's doing a great job. Andy's our public works director, Andy Barlow. He is doing a great job with those projects moving forward. He's got a background, worked closely with the state in the past, and it's paid off dividends for the city having his guidance and leadership there on these projects and working it through. Bob, I agree with you. In a lot of ways, this city of Mount Juliet is still playing catch up on that thing. But to some degree, that's an expectation when you've been one of the fastest growing cities in the state and one of the youngest cities in the state too. So I don't want to take away from the accomplishments that we've seen over the years, but at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and deny the fact that we all see so clearly that we've got some areas that we can improve on. DJ says, why are the bridges partially complete on the Greenway blocked off? Because the Greenway hasn't opened yet. It's still considered an active construction zone. We expect that to open, and I hope nothing with the pandemic is going to slow that, but we expect that to open the next month, or well, actually a few days from now, so sometime in the month of May we expect that to open up. And you can see they're starting to make good headway on the parking and the trailhead. David says 440, a perfect example of infrastructure waiting. Yes, when I work in the office, I drive 440 just about every day through there. So I have driven through the construction, and I anxiously await brighter days on 440. David says, chicken or egg? Infrastructure brings growth, which is necessary revenue, thus increasing funding via the park. You know, that's an interesting comment, say chicken or egg, because when I first moved to Mount Juliet, I lived south of the interstate, and there was a sign down there when you got off the interstate, and it said, welcome to Providence, or Providence coming soon. And I thought this sign looks, we'll never see a Providence. I don't know what this is anyway. Live, work, and play. Sure enough, we built Providence. And not me personally, I wasn't involved with the city at the time, and honestly never thought I would be, but it said coming soon, and they built Providence on there, and it's on a 2-lane highway. I'm questioning, why in the world did these guys build this big shopping center here on a 2-lane highway? And that's always a fun discussion that I see going around social media. I can't always explain the way things work without knowing all the details, but I don't claim to know all the details and the history on that. But I'll ask this question, just something to think about. They talk about having infrastructure in place before the growth, which seems like a very logical thing to do, anybody thinking. But then the question comes for, if the infrastructure comes in place before the growth, then who paid for that infrastructure? Then the answer to that generally is the people that already live there. So you get this chicken and the egg. Of course, the perfect way to do it would be having the infrastructure come in and pay for the growth as they both grew at the same rate. But I've never seen that actually work in practice. We're looking and exploring some ways to try to make that work better in the future. We're seeing some changes in law that I think we can take some opportunities of. But then again, there's always that unintended consequences of government action. So we shall see as we proceed with that. But living and driving through there every day when it was a 2-lane road really kind of reminded me of that chicken and egg concept on this thing, as growth paying for itself or not paying for itself. growth, being where we are, there's always the demand for more people to choose Mount Juliet. And to be honest, it's for the same reasons we chose to live here. It's the good schools, it's a safe community, it's a wonderful place to raise your family. So there's always that desire for more people to live here and call Mount Juliet home. And it's the struggle to keep up with the infrastructure. It should be better to put pipes in the ground when you're building the road rather than doing the road then coming back. Yes, I agree, Andy. Well, I don't see a lot of things, a lot of new comments on here. Obviously did not on this virtual town hall get to all the comments. I'm going to go through there. I probably won't be able to respond to all of them, but I think we've covered the majority of the topics here tonight that were brought up. The food trucks I know is a hot item to everyone out there. We've not made any changes to the requirements, but it's obvious that needs to be revisited. And of course, changing a law takes a little bit of time, and we definitely won't work it out on a live stream tonight. But I do thank everybody for joining. I thank you for your time, your support, your understanding as we go through things in the city, as we literally navigate reopening a city and recovering from an economic standpoint that we've not seen before. I've said it to a few people, there's no playbook on a global pandemic. And, fortunately we've been blessed in this state to not see the predictions that some put out there. And, I understand there's a lot of debate around that, but at the same time, we have not seen anywhere near the worst case scenarios in this city. So we are blessed to see that. We're blessed to be in the city that we're at and see the recovery that I believe is coming. I think all the things that were there that drove this economy and got us to where we were economically are still there. Once we get past this threat, and it's going to take some time, I believe, to do it. But once we get past that, I believe the same things that got us to where we were are going to be right there to bring us back to where we were. I have faith in Mount Juliet. I have faith in the people here. I have faith in the direction we're going. It's a wonderful city, a wonderful place to raise your family, and those things don't happen by accident. So again, I appreciate what you're doing. If you enjoy this videos, please share it, like the page. Look for the newsletter out there. We want to be there to answer questions. I want to be your most accessible guy out there when it comes to being part of this community and answering questions. I know we won't always agree on everything, but I just want to take events like this and take these opportunities to try to explain how we got from point A to point B. So, Chris,
I want to thank you for this opportunity. First of all, James, you and I certainly haven't always agreed, but you've taken some tough positions, try to do the right thing, even if it's put you on the out with some of your fellow elected officials. And I personally appreciate that and thank you. It says a lot about your character for doing the right thing. And I appreciate that. Mike, I just want to mention, it is an election year. No matter where you stand politically, this has got to be one of the best run election commissions I've ever seen in terms of it's easy to vote here. It's easy to, take the privilege that we all have to vote. So if you're not registered to vote, please get out there and register. And thanks to Mike and all the poll workers, because you're in and out, particularly if you early vote. They make it so easy here. So thank you. And just, with the COVID-19, well, probably, I think we've done we've done the right thing with social distancing, and hopefully that is the reason the numbers are not what was initially projected. We can't get complacent, and but I too plan on continuing to frequent all our local businesses and hoping everybody gets back and running soon. But again, James, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for taking the time to do this with me. I know we actually talked about doing this last month, and due to the COVID and some other things out there, the timing just probably wasn't right. And I think you were definitely the right guy to bring some insight together on the on the budget process, having worked through that from definitely a different point of view than I have, as sitting behind the table, being on the other side of the table. So your insights are very valuable. Someday we might even share the story of how we met and our first encounter. You said we haven't always agreed on things, so. But that's water on the bridge. Again, I'm going to end this and just again thank everybody for joining, and invite you to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're there, the newsletter. Share if you like this information. Appreciate what you do. Thank you for your support, and always feel free to reach out to me if I can help in any way. Just thank you. I mean, you as the citizens, you are definitely the ones that make this city what it is, and really make it easy for five guys to sit behind the table as elected officials and take credit for a lot of the good things that you guys do, and the way you raise your family and take care of your community. And I'm grateful to serve. Just thank you, everyone.
Thanks.